Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andy Reese with the Director of Department on Disability Services. We are meeting usually we're here on the fourth Friday of the month. We're here this week because we have, as people know, the mayor's budget was published, and we have our budget hearing on April the 23rd from 9:30 to 6 p.m. And so we wanted to review the budget with everyone so that you would be well prepared to be able to prepare testimony and attend our budget hearing next Thursday. And in just a moment, I think we will have the slides up so that we can start the presentation. So what we're going to go over today is, as I've always gone over, the budget process, and then we'll do an overview of our FY27 proposed budget. And I just have one slide of the sort of big picture takeaways that I see in the budget and then any questions that people have. Next slide. So just as a reminder to people, the budget process, and as it says, it starts up there at the top with community engagement. And as people may recall, we had a budget forum late October last year so that we could hear from people about your budget priorities, and we could talk about what we knew as we were preparing our budget. And as it says here, we have agency budget roundtables. We in the fall receive the mark from the mayor's office, and it's a budget number that we have to meet. And we submit then a budget to the mayor, have discussions with the mayor. The mayor's budget team then works on it, and the mayor presents her budget. And then council has their hearings. Council prepares a finalized budget and sends the budget to Congress for congressional review. As people are aware, Congress has to approve the district's budget. There's a 30-day congressional review period before our budget is approved. And then beginning October 1, we execute the budget. And throughout the year, we monitor our performance and the implementation of the budget. Next slide. So if you look here, as I was saying, mid-October, we receive our mark from the mayor's office. Mid-November, we submit a budget. And this is, as we talked about when we did the budget forum in the fall, a really challenging process because early on, what the mayor tasks each agency with, excuse me, allergies are hitting hard this time of year for me this year for some reason. So what the mayor tasks each agency with is to really scrutinize our budget and identify areas where we could identify savings in the budget. And then in December, we have meetings with the mayor's budget office, which is the Office of Budget and Performance Management, where we talk through those sort of theoretical savings that we've identified and the implications of each of them. And then after that, the mayor, as everyone is aware, which she has done for the whole time she's been in office, before she receives that information herself and makes final decisions about the district's budget, she has community meetings to hear from the community about what their view is, what their priorities are in the budget. This year on April 14th, the chief financial officer certified the budget and sent it to council. As I said, our hearing is on April 23rd. By July, the council will have voted on and transmitted the budget to Congress. Next slide, please. So if you look at this, it gives you from FY24 to FY27 proposed. So DDS's budget, FY24 and FY25 was about $198 million. you see something of a jump in FY26, and this is because we saw the shift of the cost of the direct support professional wages from DHCF and the ARPA funds over to DDS's budget. And this year, you see overall, DDS has a slight increase in its overall budget from FY26 to FY27, from $229 to $230 million. Next slide. And so kind of walking through how we account for those changes in our budget. So our baseline going into the year was about 162.5 million. One of the things I talked about when we had our budget forum in the fall is that sometimes items are added to our budget as a one-time only funding issue. So keep in mind that when the mayor submits the budget and the chief financial officer certifies it, not only are they certifying the budget, but also the fiscal plan, which is the budget over the next 4 years. And so sometimes items are one-time only funded because over the fiscal plan, they haven't yet identified the resources to continue that funding. And so we start the process of our budget development where we have all of our one-time only funding removed. And in our FY26 budget, our one-time only funding, the most significant issue there was that the DSP wages, the enhancement in our waiver for DSP wages, which was about 11.5 million, was funded one time only in FY26. And so we had to figure out how to fund that within our budget. We also had the admin fee for the providers for the reimbursement for residential expenditures, which is $1 million. And then we had some other sort of some other expenditures like some IT expenditures, local travel, out-of-town travel, some professional services that were also funded one time only for a total of 12.7 million. From our local baseline, we did have some increase for personnel and fringe benefit costs, which relates to planned increases that people will be getting based on if there are union cost contracts where we have to include increases, or if there are steps allowed and we're increasing for steps. So there's a plan for how we'll do that. And then we also have an increase. It says to support pre-existing programmatic initiatives, which is essentially funding the waiver. So the pre-existing programmatic initiatives includes both ensuring that the waiver is funded, the DSP increase that we saw in FY26, which people may recall only covered 3/4 of the cost of the waiver of the DSP wage, because the first quarter of FY26, those funds were still covered with ARPA funds. And so in FY27, for the first time, we have DSP wages fully integrated into our local funds budget. So there were additional about 4.5 million to cover that. In addition, there's a cost of living increase in the waiver, not in wages, but in other elements of the waiver. And then a small decrease in contractual services, which is just $1,000. So that we have an FY27 proposed budget that's 167.6 million, which is about a 3% increase. Special purpose revenue, those are funds, those are earnings that we receive, a variety of different sources where we receive people's Social Security, SSI that's used to pay a portion of people's residential expenses. some of the funds that we receive in Randolph-Sheppard come into us and go back out again to the Randolph-Sheppard vendors. That's special purpose revenue. We get some Social Security reimbursement. You will notice that that goes from 13.9 million in FY26 down to 10.3 million. It's a reduction of about 3.5 million. The reason for that is that the 13.9 million in FY26 included some fund balance that we had, which is that we had received funds, but they were not budgeted for prior years. And so we utilized those funds to fill local funds gaps in FY26. But the 10.3 million, closer to 10.4 million, more accurately reflects the amount that we expect to receive in the coming year. And then we've got federal grants coming in. The federal payment total is about 34.8 million, which includes some Medicaid dollars as well as the DDD grant and the vocational rehabilitation, and then some other small grants that RSA receives. The federal Medicaid payment is a slight increase, which reflects earnings that we have been seeing for our total proposed budget of 230.6 million. Next slide, please. And so this is how that budget breaks down by administration. The DDA budget overall is a $2 million increase. It goes from 171 to 173 million in FY27. RSA is a slight decrease of about $150,000. It's actually a little, well, going from 22.1 to 21.9 million. The disability determination division, which is the folks that do the Social Security medical determination, is a decrease from 12.8 to 11.9 million, but that's a projection, and it tends to be that if more funds are needed, then we've been allocated more funds, but that has not ever been an issue. And then the agency management goes from 21.6 to 21.9 million, and fiscal operations is our OCFO staff, and that remains relatively flat from 1.8 to 1.8 million. Next slide. So the local funds budget, as I said, it's a $5 million increase from 162 to 167. That's about a 3% increase. Special purpose revenue, it's a $3.5 million decrease, but that's reflecting more accurately the funds that are received. All of those funds are just pass-through funds, essentially. And then federal grant funds, there's a decrease based on expected amount of the grants, and that would be adjusted based on what the final grant amounts are. We make a projection, for example, about what the carryover funds will be in our various federal grants. All of those go for 2 years, and so we would adjust based on what the actual is after the beginning of the fiscal year. And then Medicaid payments, there's a slight increase based on collections that we've seen this year, from 16.6 to 17.8 million. Staffing, there's this, it says a 0.04 change. So one of the things about staffing is that the way they do budgets now with this new fiscal system we have, there are some positions that are charged to us that now show up as staffing in our budget for OCP and Octo. And because of those changes, we see a slight change here. We have not had any changes in DDS staffing this year. That remains flat. So first, DDA, as people may be aware, we're supporting now more than 2,500 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The proposed budget for FY27 is 173 million. And the local proposed budget is 152 million. This supports two waivers, as people know, that serve currently approximately 2,000 people. So the waiver, which is really the one of the largest parts of our budget, you see these increases in the waiver, and part of the increase, as I said, relates to the ARPA, the DSP wage being brought into our budget. But what we see is a current year proposed amount of 404 million with a slight increase in the coming year up to 418.7 million. Waiver and residential costs. In the IDD waiver, we are currently have utilized 1,923 slots, so that people are aware. A slot is used by a person if they utilize it at any point in the year. So, and also keep in mind that our waiver requires that we have available slots and resources to serve people. So while we may have slots, if we don't have adequate resources, that's what causes us also to need a waiting list. Not having adequate slots actually has arisen one time in the past, and that doesn't really cause a problem generally. When it occurred in 2017, we just reached out to DHCF. They submitted a waiver slots amendment, and it was granted within a week. So if we have a concern about slots, CMS pretty quickly will raise the number of slots. If we have a concern about resources, that's a district issue to address. So our residential costs in our FY27 budget, it is proposed at $27.2 million. Our budgeted residential cost in FY26 is $26.1 million. And the actual expenditures in 25 is 26.8 million. And so the challenge, as I've said, like DDA and waiver and residential costs really drive the DDS budget. So DDA's share of the DDS local budget, the total local budget for the agency is 167.6 million. 91% of that is for DDA. And then the remaining 9% is for RSA, AMP, and the agency fiscal officer, or the OCFO funds. And within DDA, the local funds budget, 90% of those funds are going to direct services, which is going to the waiver and to residential support. So out of 152.6 million in local funds for DDA, 137 million of it is going for the waiver and residential supports. The remaining 15 million is for some small contracts we have, like PCR, the Columbus death investigations, other small things that assessments that may be needed to do eligibility, and then personnel costs. And this just shows sort of a breakdown of, for DDA, overall DDA's budget of 153 million is funded by 89% local funds. Program income accounts for 8.8 million, which is people's SSI and SSDI that we receive that helps partially fund their residential support, and then Medicaid funds that we receive that also go to help fund residential support, and also pay some staff. And in services that are provided, 126 million is going toward the waiver, which is 80% of the funds. And then residential supports are another 19% of the funds. It's really 18 point something, but you really have this small slice of other contracts. So overall, the residential cost total of 27.1 million, this is accounted for. 11 million of this is local funds, 8.7 million special purpose revenue. This is people's SSI and SSDI. So that's the portion of the rent and residential costs that a person pays themselves is 8.7. And then we make up the difference with local funds and Medicaid funds in the amount of almost $7.3 million. And the way that these are broken down, on the next slide, it's maybe a little small for people to see. At least for me, I'm a little distance here from the screen, but I have one in front of me. So if you look at this on your own computer, what you see that this is primarily going to occupancy, and what we have here is the comparison from FY26 to FY27. There are increases in all areas except that the admin costs for the providers remained flat. Or it actually, I'm sorry, it didn't remain flat. It went down because there was one-time only funding in FY26 to cover an increase to that, which was not funded again in FY27. And other than that, you see increases in all other areas, which includes occupancy, clothing, supplies, communication, food, medicine, furniture. So all other areas increase. The overall cost of residential increases. That one area decreased, but all the others did increase. And if you look at the breakdown by person, occupancy varies depending on, this would be on the next slide. The occupancy cost varies depending on the size of the unit that they're in, the cost of the unit. We do have rent guidelines, but those are determined on an individual basis. Food per person is about $4,700 per year. Clothing, $336 per year. Medicine, $500 per year. Supplies, $500 a year. Furniture, it says $1,000, but that's sort of up to $1,000 based on people's needs. Communications is $800. I'm sorry, $1,800. But this is per household. So it would be divided per person depending on how many people are in the household. And then the admin fee varies by provider. Next, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, which, as people know, that's to help people. It includes vocational rehabilitation, which is the primary driver of that budget, that helps people with disabilities obtain, retain, regain, or maintain or advance in employment. Our proposed FY27 budget is $21.9 million. This is the VR program has a local match requirement as well as a maintenance of effort requirement. The federal share is 78.7% and the local share is 21.3%. As I said, within RSA, we also have some smaller programs. RSA's budget includes the Assistive Technology Grant, which is a pass-through. ULS has, the AT Center has been the district's AT provider for a number of years. We have an Independent Living Services Grant. There's Independent Living Older Blind. I think that covers it. And, oh, and supported employment, some small grants as well. The supported employment grants amount to about $300,000 a year. Independent living is about $358,000 a year. Independent living older blind is $250,000. The AT grant is a little north of $400,000. Supported employment has a small match. It's a 10% match on half of the grant. And then independent living and independent living older blind both also have 10% local matches. So the match requirement for the VR grant in FY 27, as you see in the bottom left-hand corner, is estimated to be 4.7 million. This is based on what we expect the total grant amount to be. And our local budgeted amount is just over the match amount. So we have budgeted to meet the match. The challenge that we have, and you can see from some of the prior years, maintenance of effort, the requirement is that we spend in local funds at least the same amount that we spent two fiscal years ago. Therefore, in FY 27, the maintenance of effort amount would reflect the local amount that was spent in FY 25. What you will notice is that if our expenditures in a year are less than what we spent 2 years prior, then we get a penalty against our grant in a subsequent year. So that, for example, our expenditures, you can see that our expenditures, for example, in FY 23, in the top right cell of this chart, were 6.9 million. Our maintenance of effort requirement that year was 8.8 million. And so we've had a pretty substantial penalty that's being assessed this year. Same challenge in FY 24, and we see it again in FY 25. What that means is that each year we will see a penalty against our grant. Now, there are a couple of caveats to that that make me not as concerned about it. The first caveat is in FY 25, for the first time in years, we got a cost of living increase to our grant, and our cost of living increase was very close to the amount of our penalty. And so for us, it is that the grant amount is kind of going to stay flat. The other caveat to it is that many states have challenges with even meeting their match. And so what happens is the Department of Education pays the grant out over the year. If a state is unable to meet their match, they have to return funds in August of the year. They go on the same fiscal year that we do, because if they haven't covered their 21.3%, they have to return funds or they don't get their final payment from the federal government, depending on the amount that they missed their match by. Those funds then are available for what's called reallotment to states that have adequate match to cover. And so this, in 2027, we're very close. We will see in 26 and 27, we, at times in the past, well, almost every year in the past, we have had sufficient funds to seek reallotment funds. So depending on how our local budget goes over the course of the year, even though our original grant may have had a penalty, down the road, we can get caught up with having seeking reallotment funds. And as I say, what it means is that rather than getting the cost of living increase that everyone got last year, we're just living at the same flat amount that we had been getting for about the last 10 years. So we've been managing on it all along. Next is just, this just kind of covers sort of where the money goes within RSA in FY 25. The primary areas where we've spent our funds, pre-employment transition services, of course, 1.7 million. Post-secondary education, just a little over $1 million. Job coaching, a little over 200,000, and job search, 153,000, and then assessment, 160,000. So it gives you some idea of the kinds of services that we are spending funds on. I have noticed, by the way, questions pop up along the way, but between the couple of screens, I'm going to catch all the questions at the end. Lastly, DDD, as I said, they do Social Security review and determination of medical determination of disability claims. It's 100% federally funded. We actually just got permission. Finally, people may be aware that we've often, in the agency where we have to report on the number of vacancies, we've always had a high number of vacancies in DDD because the Social Security Administration has to approve hiring, and they have finally approved hiring, I think, for 3 additional examiner positions, and we will be posting those very soon. So the overall takeaways from my perspective, and as I get to the questions, there may be other takeaways people have. First and foremost, I'll just say we have all heard about what a challenging budget year FY27 is going to be. And even in that context, DDS received a 3% increase in its local funds budget. And none of that increase is one-time only funding. So that's part of the very good news. There is IDD and IFS waiver Medicaid growth funded in the budget. However, it's not on the salaries. It's just on some other elements within the waiver. And when our budget was developed, at that time, there were the plans for a waiting list to be in place. And so when the projections were done, they were done based on the idea that there was a waiting list in place. And therefore, we still expect to have to implement that in October. However, people may be aware, I think people should be aware, that we had the DDA PCO sustainability work group where we talked about identifying ways of providing services in a manner that was more efficient, identifying where we could ensure that people's needs were met, but also achieve some savings. Coming out of that, we will have some recommended waiver amendments that we'll be proposing, I am hoping, for January of 2027. We also had some practice changes that were recommended that we will be implementing. And our hope is that as we begin to implement some of these changes, where what we're looking at is ensuring that we're supporting people, providing services aligned with what the person's needs are. Some of the really significant differences, we have just started, for example, and it's a little bit early still, but we'll be providing an update at some point in the next few months. We have a pilot project that's ongoing that we hope will serve a little over 100 people, where we've provided funds for infrastructure for 3 providers to implement remote supports. And we will see 2 things. One, are there savings that accrue from that, but also to what extent people become more independent and are really able to live their life with the supports they need without having staff being present 100% of the time. Okay. We're not to questions yet. The FY26 one-time enhancement to cover administrative costs for residential provider contracts, just like last year, it was not renewed. So that is not included in our FY27 budget. We still did not have funds for a cost of living increase for non-union district government staff, who in fact have not had increases since 2022. And this is just a point for people to keep in mind. There's nothing that needs to be done this year, but changes that have been done in Healthcare Alliance, we need to keep an eye on that for issues in the FY28 budget. Yeah, as people know, there'll be changes at the end of this calendar year. I hope to be with all of you next year, but there are some changes that will go into effect next in 2027 that we need to be paying attention to. And so as we begin development next year, I just want to keep this on people's radar. So now I'm going to see what questions we have had here. So will the PowerPoint be available immediately? We will check with someone to see if they can get this posted immediately. Yes. No, so it says I indicated that there were CLIN lines were increasing in FY27. Does this reflect a higher per person allocation? No, it does not. It's an assumption of higher spending in each of those CLINs, but not a higher per person cost in each of those CLINs. So how much additional funding would you need in order to receive, would you need to receive from council to feel there's no need to implement a waiting list? As I said, our hope in FY27 is that from the discussions that we had regarding changes to how we provide services and some suggested waiver amendments, that we'll be able to achieve savings there so that we can in that way be able over the course of the year to serve all people that need those services. What percentage of waiver funding for this year was spent during the first half of FY26? We haven't yet gotten our federal, I'm trying to remember what FRP stands for. I know that we're already almost through April, but we haven't yet gotten the final March numbers. But we have been running. Sorry. So I also want to mention that one of the challenges that we have is that we have not yet received our approval for our waiver amendment for FY that was submitted. As the providers are well aware, our waiver rates were increased in January 2027. And CMS had told us that they would be approved by several weeks ago, by the middle of March, and we still do not have them. And so while I can look at year to date and say that things are sort of comfortably on budget as it relates to our waiver expenditures, that budget is based on a belief that the waiver amendment would be approved and rates are not retroactively approved. So we're going to have a challenge in FY26 either way. What we are seeing is some we're seeing because of some changes that have been made within DDA in terms of service planning and coordination, and someone needs to be muted, and working with people on staffing levels, making sure that we were staffing people at the level to meet their needs. We have begun to see some savings there in our per person costs, and our authorization levels for people. And so far this year, even though we have not been able to implement the waiting list, we have been managing. And like I say, I think that a big part of that is related to ensuring that people's staffing levels are approved at a level reflective of the person's assessed needs. And so that has meant some reduction in hours of staffing for people, which is what drives our costs. And it does seem to be helping with our level of waiver expenditures. Thank you. As several people said, FRP, financial review process. So there's another question about the issue of waiting lists. It says it arose because the council awarded 1.8 million. It was 1.67 million, but anyway, less. So the FY27 budget was built differently than the FY26 budget. So it's not just a matter of saying that we need X number of dollars. And as I said, what our hope is that, I think that the working group that came together did a really good job of discussing how we provide services so that we can provide services in a manner that ensures that people are supported to meet their health and safety needs, but where we're not overstaffing people out of this concern about sort of, what if the kind of and making sure, and we had a lot of discussions about how do you make sure that people's staffing is at a level that meets their needs and not beyond that. We also, in our waiver amendment that we hope to be submitting, we'll be looking at the possibility of some adjustments around how we do house rates, which gets to the issue of where we have people who have different levels of needs within one house, and how we might be able to support each of them consistent with their needs rather than supporting both of them at the level of the higher needs person in the home. We've also been very diligent in the last year or two in looking when people were moving at the level of need of the people in homes that they considered for transfer to, so that we more closely align people based on those needs. And so we're hoping that through all of these staffing changes that we will be able to garner the savings that we need so that we can live within the budget that we have and be able to serve all people. Any other questions? Okay, well, we will speak with someone this afternoon to see if we're able to get this posted immediately on our website. By next Wednesday would certainly be a little late. If it's not today, I think it's reasonable to say that it could be Monday. I didn't see, I know who does it. I don't know whether that person's here today. But if they're not here today, I'm certain that by Monday we could get this posted on our website. We'll make every effort to get it done today, though. We could also, I think, we could email the slide deck. I don't want to send it to 1,000 people is all.
I will put my email address in the chat as well. If we cannot get it posted today, if you can send me an email requesting the PowerPoint, I can send it out to those individuals who reach out to me.
There's a question, are there resources for more on the history of the budget and the various terms used? Not that I'm aware of. People just have to do like I did, which is ask. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, have a very good afternoon and weekend. Enjoy this quasi-spring, feeling sometimes too much like summer weather. And I hope to see many of you next week at our budget hearing. Thank you.